weapons on board, to do that.
Yeah, and a lot of weight.
My goodness. Hey, we had several topics we could cover tonight if you felt like it.
Well, we got, up to 8:00 is whatever you want to talk it. You're the guest, not me. I just ask questions as you talk, to make it, really.
All right. Well, we thought possibly it'd be fun to go back in our history a little bit to see if there were ever any strange events that we may have run into along the way. And I think we each had at least one that we could describe that might be interesting to the viewers. Julie, what do you think? You wanna go at it?
I'll take this. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you fine.
Great. So as Andy was talking about, and the way this came up was interesting because we were just sitting, I don't know, out in the hot tub the other day going, have you ever had anything strange happen to you growing up as a kid that would relate to a lot of the things that we've been reviewing here with, UFOs, aliens, things, the paranormal, the supernatural. So much is out there right now that do we reflect on ourselves or do we just accept it? So I started thinking about something that actually happened to me when I was 16. I was living in my parents' home in the San Fernando Valley. It was the mid-'70s. They had a 2-story home, newly built, where once was a chicken farm, so they were the original owners. It was a 4-bedroom house where all the bedrooms were upstairs. My bedroom was overlooking the front entrance to the house, and my parents' room circled all the way around to the other side of the house with 2 bedrooms in between. One night, I went to bed, like always, around 9. I had school the next morning, and I couldn't even tell you what time it was because we didn't have illuminating clocks as we do now. But I could have felt maybe early morning, probably 1-ish or something, where I felt awake, but not really. I felt completely paralyzed, yet I felt quite awake as I laid on my back. I felt scared and not in control of my faculties. And as I laid there looking straight up to the ceiling, I saw a shadow leaning over me with a very large head, a skinny neck and torso, and long, thin arms reaching around my head. I could feel myself trying to scream, but I couldn't. I could feel my throat expanding, but I couldn't get my mouth open. As my eyes started to widen and focus on the shadow, it started to fade. And I finally regained my faculties, and I screamed out, but nobody came to my room. So I curled up in a ball, keeping my eyes wide open, looking around the room, and then I wondered if I was dreaming right up to that point that I screamed, and maybe that's why no one came to my room. I've never spoken about this, and until recently when Andy and I were talking about our incidences that were unusual in our lives, did I recall this one. So, it's these things where you hear about people either in, I don't want to say that I was abducted, but abductions, coming to play where paralysis is part of something that overtakes us. And I don't know if it is, I'm sure there's a logical explanation.
Well,
that's one of the things that...
You hit it right there because you hit it right on the nail there because I don't know if you listened to my show, but, I have had some major guests on the show in the last 2 weeks, like Calvin Parker and a bunch of other people that, had UFO abductions, alien abductions. And, their stories, what they tell, kind of match what everybody else says. One of my guests, again, he was like a kid. He was in his bunk bed on top. And all of a sudden, he kind of like saw a alien, coming into the room. And then he was abducted. I hear these all the time. And it all kind of... And what I find also, Julie, it was really interesting, is that a lot of people that get into this UFO thing, which I am very heavy, seem to have something happen to them when they were young. They saw something. They heard something. And that has always intrigued them, and it's always been in the back of their mind.
Yeah, and it's weird. Wow. It's like, I just completely put this out of my head. Didn't even think about it. And also we're starting to talk about these things like, oh my gosh, I had an incident. Something like this happened to me. And we put it out of our minds because what association do we have to something like this when you're a kid? Especially back in the 70s. I don't think ufology was even a thing back then. It was Outer Limits or, sci-fi movies. But nobody talked about it like, this could be possible, right?
Well, they didn't want to talk about it because I'll be honest with you. It's only been the last few years where people are able to talk about it and not have people look at you as you're strange. Like I told you guys before, I've been out of broadcasting since 1976 doing paranormal when I first started. If back when I had my strange encounter back in the early 70s, if I would have started telling people then what I saw, what happened to me, they would look at me like, hey, you need to go get help. And nowadays, because there's so many sightings and so many reliable sightings from everybody from police officers to doctors to lawyers, government officials, you name it, have seen strange things. And you can't cover it up. And I'm going to be honest with you. I think disclosure is going to hit one of these days soon. Because I think, the government can't keep it, bundled up much longer now.
Yeah.
Wow.
I know Andy has a story, too.
Well, let's hear your story, Andrew.
He does. I guess he should tell it. He kind of does. I was having dinner the other night sitting across from Barbara Lamb, who's down in San Diego these days. I don't know if you've ever interviewed Barbara. She's authored a few books. She does hypnosis regression for individuals who believe they've been abducted. So do you know which Barbara Lamb I'm talking about?
I know of her. I've never had her on the show.
Okay, well, she attends our MUFON Orange County meetings quite often. And I was telling her about this situation I ran into, and she said, well, if you felt like it, make an appointment and be regressed through hypnosis, because she still does that kind of work in San Diego. So I don't know, but maybe. But what I recall back in the 1970s as well, and again, I was a teenager. I was living at home. I grew up in El Segundo, and we lived on a hill. Well, there's a lot of hills in El Segundo, but we were on one of them. And so what that means is your house is level, but your yard is at an angle, right? Because you're on a hill. And my bedroom was at the front of the house and had a big window and looking out to the front and the street. And my window was elevated at least about 6 feet because we were on this angle at the hill. So it's a large window, but it's not the sort of thing where someone could crawl in and out of it. You'd have to actually climb up into it if you really wanted to try to do that. So, and my bed was right next to the window. So as a kid, if I sat up and I pulled the shade open, I could wave to someone standing out on the curb, So that's the sort of situation. And one night, I woke up and I was frozen stiff. I couldn't move. And I was shocked because the window shade and the window drapes were floating over my bed. And the light was pouring in from outside because we had a street lamp just on the corner edge of the house property. And so the shades are up in the air, the light's pouring in, I'm frozen, I can't move, and I don't know what's going on. And that must have been frozen in time for about 10 seconds, and then the shades just fell back into place. And there was no wind. I was thinking, could the wind have done that? But there was no wind. And that's never left me. I've always wondered, what the heck was that, And should I ever try to find out what that was? Because it was very odd for me.
Well, I certainly would go back and have somebody regress you on that, because, that is just one of the what you just said. I heard it so many times, but people that have been abducted, that they can't move for a few seconds or, a minute or two, and what you just said fits right in it.
Oh my.
So, this kind
the first thing,
this kind of maybe sets why when you got older, you were interested, all of a sudden became interested in UFOs.
it might have always been there. And I was thinking back farther. What was the first real time I had any interest at all in UFOs and aliens? And I got to tell you a little funny story that it was in the early 60s, and I was watching a 1950s black and white sci-fi movie. It was called The Man from Planet X.
Oh, yeah.
And actually, I found it recently, that DVD. It's colorized now, so I had to buy it, and I had to rewatch it. And that movie and the alien in that movie just terrified me watching it. And the moment that show was over, I was running around the house, slamming the doors, locking the windows, because I was freaking out. That alien was going to drop by and pay us a visit. And so that was my first real scare. But it wasn't until probably the 1992 that my brother Greg handed me a book he was reading on Roswell. And that enlightened me of, hey, something actually happened and there might have been evidence. So that was great. And probably the same year, 92, my brother Greg and I, we decided to drive out to the Area 51. You can't go to it, of course, but we went to the valley just next to it and paid a visit to the little alien inn out there in Rachel, Nevada.
Uh-huh.
And we had a great time. Spent the night out there on a Wednesday night and actually saw what Bob Lazar had noted back then, that on Wednesdays they'd test fly a UFO south of Area 51 and the S4 area. And what seemed to be like 20 miles away from us, we saw this white light up in the sky doing some weird stuff, and we figured maybe that was it. So that was pretty cool. And later on in life, we visited out there again. And hey, Julia, you want to talk about that one?
Oh, we went to go to Rachel.
Yeah, in Area 51.
Oh, well, that was fun. That was more. We went with our daughter, who was little at the time. I think she might have been 10 years old, and our dog. Driving cross country, the end result was to reach Four Corners. So we ended up going to Rachel, going to the little alien inn, and it's a podunk little place, but it's kind of like a museum. Lots of fun little UFO paraphernalia all over the place. But then along the way is that long road to Area 51, which has the ominous mailbox. That is at the end of the road. It's just a very bizarre thing. It's like, do the aliens get their mail here? Anyhow, so we went in.
It was good. It was good to expose the girls to the UFO side of things in Area 51. It was fun to drive out there. If anyone's in the Las Vegas area visiting, it's a day trip to drive out there and back and have a lunch out there. So I'd say go for it.
But one thing I just want to warn people: do not step on Area 51. Back about 4 months ago, a guy went into Area 51 with some type of object, and I hate to say it, he died instantly because their security killed him.
Oh my!
Yeah,
what?
so they use
oh my God.
They use lethal force. So if you step on, that's one place in this country. If you go on, they have the right to use lethal force, and they do. They did with this guy.
You know what, Andy?
Wow.
Correct me if I'm wrong. When we were driving past that road with the mailbox, didn't we attempt to go up the road just maybe 20 feet, and then we saw an SUV coming down over the hill down the road, and that's when we turned around and said, "Okay, it's time to get out of here."
Smart
Remember
move.
doing that?
I may recall that. Yes, we saw the SUV. The SUV. It's either a truck or SUV that hangs out there on the hill watching to make sure no one drives up there.
Yeah.
Yeah. You did the right thing, because either you're going to go away in jail for a while, or like, and this guy had a cylinder type of thing.